Content warning. This video contains discussions and depictions of child predators, homophobia, and drug use. Watch with caution.
Welcome. You've got
Cat. Well, here we are, y'all. We made it. I know you're excited for me to finally be covering Degrassi The Next Generation. When I first envisioned this series, it was The Next Generation that I was the most excited about. It's the series that I have the most experience with, and it was what I thought I had the most to say about, although based on the length of the last two videos, I had plenty to say about Degrassi Classic. But I'm also a little nervous. Okay, more than a little nervous. This is a big series, and I have a lot to cover. I also know that many of you, like me, have a deep personal connection to this show, and I want to make sure that I do it justice. So before we start, let's get this out of the way. This is part of a series. If you haven't watched my videos on Degrassi Junior High and Degrassi High, I highly recommend it. It will provide some context for some of the things that I say in this video, and some questions you have here may be answered over there. However, like Degrassi The Next Generation, you do not need any prior knowledge to jump into this video. So if you just want to start here, then welcome. Thanks for watching. We are about to have a lot of fun. Part 1, History. Right, so book report time. Degrassi The Next Generation is a teen drama series that follows a group of teenagers attending Degrassi Community School, which, as far as I can tell, teaches whatever grades they need it to. In season 1, it starts with junior high, 7 and 8, and eventually shifts to being solely a high school. As the name of the show, The Next Generation, implies, it is a continuation of a series of television shows all focused around fictional kids and teenagers living around the real-world location of Degrassi Street and attending the fictional schools of Degrassi Junior High and high schools in Toronto, Canada. The Next Generation part of its name is both literal and figurative. The name was a suggestion of creator Linda Schuyler's husband, who was a fan of Star Trek The Next Generation, but it also references the very real fact that Emma Nelson was the daughter of a character Spike who had appeared as a teen mom on the original series Degrassi Junior High. In 1999, almost a decade after the original Degrassi series ended, a CBC talk show aimed at teenagers, Jonovision, hosted a Degrassi reunion episode. This thing is a total trip, by the way. It's so fun to watch people losing it over Stefan and Pat, and to hear the adult actors reflect on the show's popularity before it really hit the heights that it would later reach with D&G. It talks about a lot of the things that I mentioned in my last two videos, things like the teen actors' feedback was being taken into account when rewriting scripts, or that their wardrobe was heavily inspired by their own clothing, for example. The reunion episode of Jonovision proved popular, and Schuyler and Yan Moore, another Degrassi Classic writer, began brainstorming ideas for what could have happened to the Degrassi kids after high school. They considered creating a 10-year reunion special to get the gang back together, but Degrassi, with all adults, seemed to miss the point of the original show, which is all about teenagers. When the writers realized that Emma, Spike's daughter, would be entering junior high around the time the special would air, though, they saw an opportunity to feature both. The ambition on display here is pretty impressive. Schuyler and Moore went from making a modest reunion special to a movie of the week to a pilot for an all-new Degrassi series in just a matter of months. As they were brainstorming this special, new ideas just kept popping up. What if the new school had an emphasis on tech and the web, bringing the show into the 21st century? What if there was a fun in-universe tie-in website that viewers could visit as if they were Degrassi students? What if we created a whole new cast of characters and wrote a 13-episode season on top of the 2-part pilot? Their big dreams paid off big. The show was picked up by CTV, who immediately jumped on production. CTV, by the way, was a different network than had aired the original series. I have to mention that in my last video, I said Degrassi High aired on CTV, but that was my mistake. It actually aired on CBC television. Anyway, CTV picked up the new show along with the website idea, and Degrassi The Next Generation began filming in 2001. Part 2, Production. So Degrassi The Next Generation was the first in the series not to actually film around the real Degrassi Street in Toronto. In the original series, both exterior and interior shots were filmed on or near Degrassi Street and in actual high schools in the area. Instead, in the new show, most interiors were shot in Epitome Pictures' backlot studios. Epitome, which I'm pronouncing Epitome but could be Epitome, was Linda Schuyler's production company, which is mostly known for creating Degrassi, although it also produced Instant Star, love that one, Liberty Street, never seen it, and Riverdale. No, not that Riverdale. This one. Epitome is now known as Wild Brain Studios, which I know mostly because that's the name that pops up every time one of my Degrassi clips gets a copyright strike. Hi, Wild Brain. Thanks for recognizing fair use and releasing all your claims. Like Degrassi Classic, the casting process for The Next Generation prioritized real teenagers and having a diverse group to pull from. Producers at the time stressed the difference between this show and Dawson's Creek, one of the more popular teen dramas at the time. Degrassi's success has always been its relatability, and Moore and Schuyler knew this, highlighting in interviews at the time that Degrassi The Next Generation would focus on issues that were more relevant to teenagers' lives now than in the 80s. The early focus on the internet was one such update. For example, the pilot episode focuses on cyber stranger danger, and teens at the school are constantly on their computers, looking things up like tarot card meanings and info about turtles and buying condoms online. Okay, that only happens one time, but it is incredible. The tie-in website was another such update, which I have to mention here only because I can't really fit it in anywhere else. Degrassi.tv was a website where viewers could sign up for a version of the fictional school's website. Fans would make their own accounts and send and receive messages. There were also lockers, character profiles, blogs created by users and the fictional characters within the show, and message boards, which, to my memory, housed a lot of fan fiction. I was really into this website, even going so far as to insist my friends only message me on there instead of to my actual email at one point. I think the immersive role-playing nature of the site was the main reason. Users could get a look at characters behind the scenes, including small side characters or, like Heather Sinclair, those who technically never appeared at all. If you've never heard of Degrassi TV, that makes sense. As the show went on, the character pages stopped getting frequent updates and then finally stopped being updated at all. I think the novelty of kids using the internet just kind of wore off as a concept, and the official website shifted from an in-universe school site to a more traditional promotion of the show. By the late 2000s, when the show was running exclusively on the In, it became mostly a place to watch full episodes of Degrassi as long as you were willing to sit through a million Clearasil ads, which of course we all were. It was the 2000s. But back to the writing of the actual show. I found some pretty good evidence that characters were changed around a lot in production. In one interview, the creators talk about a mean girl character that everyone pretty much hates, who is motivated to be that way through her parents' divorce. My wife and I debated who this might mean. Probably Ashley, who was originally meant to just play as meaner, or maybe Paige was going to get a divorced kid storyline. Unsure. It is possible that they just meant Ash in her final iteration in the show, but for reasons that I'll discuss later, I highly doubt it. I just think that Ash was supposed to be even more unlikable in the original draft than she ended up being. Other changes are things like the monologues from the audition tapes seeming to indicate that Manny was originally going to be from somewhere in India.
And then I remember, I already have a husband picked out for me in India,
as she references having a fiance picked out for her in that country. While working on the show, production of the pilot episode was pushed up due to an empty slot in the schedule on CTV. The episode then had to be made quickly. Scheduling conflicts then prevented Kevin Smith from getting to appear in the pilot episode as Caitlin Ryan's new fiance, which was to be a cute nod to Kevin Smith's love of Degrassi in general and his love of Caitlin in particular.
And I said, a movie? And he said, yeah, it was a TV movie. It was 2 hours, and they cursed. I was like, they cursed? And Joey Jeremiah was Caitlin Ryan and Tessa Campanelli. I was like, what?
He references Caitlin in the movie Clerks, and a character expresses their love of Degrassi Junior High in the film Chasing Amy. Luckily, Kevin would eventually get his chance to mac on Caitlin Ryan, but that's for another video. Before airing, Degrassi The Next Generation would be picked up by a second network, Noggin. This is hugely important for me to mention because Degrassi's partnership with this channel would end up being hugely influential on the show in the long run. If you're an American fan of this show, it's probably because of its place on the In, Noggin's programming block for teens. So to catch you up, if you don't know, Noggin was a television network created in partnership between Nickelodeon and Sesame Workshop. It billed itself as a kind of educational Nickelodeon, with programming primarily for tweens. In 2002, a couple of years after its launch, it reworked a bit of its programming and broke itself into two main blocks. Noggin, which would air shows for younger kids, and The In, an evening block of shows for teens. Noggin picked up Degrassi back when it still had a tween focus, but after the rework, it quickly became a staple for The In time slot. As one of the few non-original shows on the network, it stood out from the rest of the lineup.
If your life were a TV show, this would be it. Don't miss a new episode of Degrassi.
The end started by airing the 3rd episode of the season first and continued, ending with the 2-part pilot as the finale for some reason. They would then replay these 15 episodes constantly, often in marathon blocks, and in the summer of 2002, that's exactly how your girl here discovered the show. Part 3, Whatever It Takes. Season 1. For the most part, I'm going to be breaking up the show into eras. A lot of y'all had great ideas for eras, and I could have gone with almost any of them, but no matter how you sliced it, I was always left thinking, Season 1 is a little weird. Like, Season 1 is good, and it has something in common with a lot of the earlier seasons of the show, but the closest comparison I can make to Season 1 of Degrassi The Next Generation is actually Season 1 of Degrassi Junior High. Even though they're very different, they both kind of have the same vibe. Both seasons are dealing with being a new show. Both are juggling introducing the characters while still learning about the actors and the storylines they want to build. I think this contributes to the low-key vibe and mostly low-stakes storylines of these seasons. They're dipping their toes in the water with this season. The premiere and finale are pretty intense by comparison, but the rest of the storylines are about things like divorce, discovering a loved one is gay, or the social pressure to have sex. Heavy issues for teenagers, sure, but one cannot yet look at the show and say it goes there. So I'm going to talk about Season 1 separately and start clumping everything up together in later videos. I think this works out better anyway since I've got a lot of characters to cover and I want to introduce as many as I can here. So, without further ado, Emma Nelson. In my last 2 videos, I talked a lot about what I referred to as the bookenders for seasons. This was a tool that the writers seemed to utilize where, instead of having typical through lines in their stories with rising and falling action throughout the season, instead they created a sense of continuity by starting and ending a season with the same character. Showing the difference in the character's situation at the beginning and end of a season gave the whole thing a sense of time, weight, and impact, without having to directly reference events from prior episodes. These bookender characters tended to serve as something of a main character in what was otherwise a fully ensemble show. Degrassi The Next Generation does this as well, at least in the first 2 seasons. They opted for a less episodic approach for Season 3, although we will get into that later. So, Emma. Emma is a lot of Season 1. She's kind of the anchor. She's literally the next generation of the next generation. However, though she is the main character of the junior class, she's not actually the bookender or even what I would call the main protagonist for this season. Emma's primary storylines this season revolve around her passion for social and environmental justice and boys. Mostly one boy in particular, Sean Cameron. Emma is the new Caitlin, as evidenced by her hero worship of Caitlin Ryan in the pilot, as well as her role on the school's newspaper, The Grapevine, which mirrors Caitlin's. And Emma's relationship with Sean also mirrors one of Caitlin's relationships, the one she had with Rick. No, not that. Different Rick. Rick was also kind of a misunderstood bad boy with a dysfunctional home life, and at the end of the only episode we ever really got about him, he moved in with his brother, just like Sean. Because Emma's storyline is so low stakes, grade 7 girl wants to save the planet and date boys definitely feels like a big deal when you are that grade 7 girl, but in the grand scheme, it's not that heavy. She ends up having the show stolen a little bit. But before we talk about that, I want to address something that weighs heavy on my heart. I'm really sorry to all of you who trusted me and my judgment, but I have to come clean. I used to be an Emma stan. Basically, no one I have ever known has ever liked Emma, and my opinion has always been, well, y'all are wrong. I think I kind of overcorrected against the hate I always see the character get, and I thought a lot of criticism of her was really unfair. Basically, I thought she's just not that bad early on, even though they do ruin her in later seasons. So full disclosure, I have rewatched Degrassi The Next Generation probably 6 times since its original inception, although what a rewatch means differs from year to year because some of those rewatches were happening in like 2009 or 2012 before the series was over. And because of this, I know the earlier seasons a lot better than the later ones, which I have watched fewer times. On this most recent rewatch that I did mostly for the purposes of refreshing myself for making these videos, I realized that actually everybody who ever criticized Emma was totally correct. She's basically pretty annoying straight from the jump. My memory of her was that she was kind of a sweetheart who was interested in social justice and environmental topics, and her entanglements with Sean and fights with Manny were aberrations in her character, not indicative of it. I thought that viewers stereotyped her because 7th grade girl obsessed with endangered species and ocean pollution is ripe for stereotyping. But rewatching the show, it's easy to tell that even from season 1, Emma Nelson would be a hard person to get along with in real life. I always thought that Emma was a character who was driven by her own values, which inevitably led to conflict with those around her, and for the most part, I do think I was correct. The part that I always failed to see was that Emma is plagued with the oh-so-common teenage problem of thinking that she is always right. That because she is righteous and pushing back against the system, she doesn't need to listen to advice or criticism from others. This is a character trait that I have to imagine was purposeful because it continues for years, and because her first episode is a really good example of this, laying the groundwork for her character. Emma's first episode is the pilot episode of the show, Mother and Child Reunion. The goal of this pilot/movie of the week storyline was twofold: bring back the classic Degrassi cast in a fun and satisfying way, and introduce a new cast of junior high kids, highlighting the new dangers that teens face, especially regarding the internet. In this episode, Emma has an online relationship with a boy through email named Jordan. He found her through her environmental website and asked for her help protecting some sort of Canadian wildlife refuge. Over time, they grew closer and learned all they had in common. Emma mentions it's like Jordan can see into her soul. When Jordan, after months of emailing with Emma, asks her to meet, she excitedly tells her friends, who wisely advise her against it.
She goes to meet him. 3 days later, they find her dead.
Not to be dissuaded, Emma then talks to Caitlin, who, in town for the reunion, does some really unhealthy projection onto a kid and tells her to ignore her friends and follow her heart, since that's kind of what Caitlin is doing with her fiancé, who is a scummy guy that none of her friends seem too impressed with at the moment. Emma takes this to heart, lies to her friends, and goes to meet up with Jordan. So this episode is Emma's first failure to listen to advice that goes against her own desires, but it will not be the last, which is wild actually, because you do think that she would learn to hear criticism better after what ends up happening in this episode. Emma is waiting in the lobby of the hotel where Jordan is supposedly staying. He's supposed to be on a class trip, which JT was hugely skeptical of, because who the hell would voluntarily go on a school trip in the summer? JT is a savvy kid. In the meantime, Emma's friends have figured out what she's doing and have cyber-sleuthed their way into her email. There's this really cute moment where they have to figure out her mom's favorite band for the security question, and they use an old high school photo of Spike wearing a Pogue shirt to figure it out. I just like that. They work out that Emma's terrible password security has made her vulnerable, not just to them, but also to Jordan, who, I guess, hacked into her emails, read what she was writing to Manny, and then parroted her own words back to her the next day. This explains she and Jordan's so-called soul connection.
The guy's not looking into her soul, he's reading her email.
So, have you figured it out? Have you worked out that we're actually in creepy adult corner? Emma is coaxed into Jordan's hotel room by an adult man who tells her that he's Jordan's teacher, and the boys are all waiting upstairs for the pizza. She follows him into the room, but after a minute or two, she seems to realize what happened and locks herself in the bathroom. The rest of the grade 7 squad run to tell Spike, who, along with Snake, runs straight to the hotel to save Emma. Snake, in a moment that highlights why all the girls got crushes on him in Degrassi High, pins the creep to the wall until the cops show up, but not before a really terrifying scene in which Jordan pulls out a video camera, the implication of what he's going to do to Emma hanging unsaid in the air. In the end, they say that this guy is a repeat offender, what the heck, and that with the emails, they will have enough evidence to put him behind bars for a long time. The cops do tell Spike that letting teenage girls have computers in their rooms is like letting predators directly into their bedrooms, which is highly alarmist shit. And really, I remember finding this episode a little preachy when I was a teenager. All of us growing up in the 2000s were told that our online friends could be predators waiting to strike. And at the time, that just felt like kind of silly. Like, I know it could happen, of course, but the idea that it would happen to me was unthinkable. Like, these people were my friends. I knew them. They wouldn't lie about their age. I was too smart for that, I thought, and I think most of my friends felt the same way. So then you have Emma, who willfully ignored all of the advice that we were all given about meeting people online. Go with friends, meet in a public space, let everyone know where you're going, etc., etc. And I always felt like I would be smarter than that if I did what she did. So in this case, Emma's stubbornness not only hurt her in the plot, but it also undermined the message of this episode. At least it did for me in particular as a teenager. Watching now as an adult, I'm just terrified. I find Emma's choice to hide from what she views as her judgmental friends really interesting and pretty realistic, if kind of a horror story. Other examples of Emma stubbornly refusing to hear criticism are in Parents' Night, in which she writes a piece about the NAK, the Channel 1 knockoff forcing kids to watch ads, and writing a piece blasting cheerleaders when she knows that Manny is trying to join the squad. So NAK is a take on Channel 1, a real program that ran for a couple of decades here in North America. The setup of Channel 1 was pretty much the same as it's portrayed in Degrassi. Channel 1 buys TVs and other media equipment for a school, and in return, the school agrees to show Channel 1 X amount of times per year. Actually, in the 2000s, my middle school aired Channel 1, and I think we saw it like maybe 3 mornings out of the week. I don't think it was every day, and our school was pretty well compensated. We had TVs mounted on the walls in almost all of the classrooms, which felt pretty impressive in 2001. Channel 1 broadcast really fluffy news stories, mostly propaganda pieces intended to keep kids on the straight and narrow. I specifically remember one piece about how badly any non-earlobe piercings could go in an attempt to keep kids from getting abnormal piercings. And of course, they also aired advertisements. One study on Channel 1 claimed that most students remembered the ads better than the actual content of the show. This is Emma's issue with the fictional NAK. She finds the stories conservative and skewed, and the advertising inappropriate for school. She writes a piece for The Grapevine, claiming that showing kids advertisements in exchange for media equipment is bribery. What she fails to account for, though, is the counter-argument that Radich makes to her. More computers at Degrassi means more access for students who may not have a computer or internet at home. So here, Emma is blinded by her own principles. She's so convinced that she's right ideologically, and she might be, that she misses the actual practical good that NAK is having on the school until it's right in her face. Sean's brother, Tracker, who is a criminally underrated character, by the way, tells her that he's willing to make kids sit through ads if it means that Sean gets access to a computer at school. Tracker points out her hypocrisy. She cares about the homeless squeegee kids shown on NAK, but she can't spare a thought for the less privileged at her own school. It's a really interesting episode. The nuance of the issues aren't swept away, which I appreciate. In the end, Emma and Sean are both apologetic. Emma sees where she went wrong, and Sean tells her that he liked her article, indicating that he likes the principled side of her and saw her perspective. This is hinted at a lot in season 1, by the way. Sean seems to be really into it when Emma stands up for what she believes in. My favorite moment is when she tells off the class for laughing at her when she gets her period. Kind of a long story. And the camera zooms in tight on Sean's face, his heartbeat pounding loudly in the background.
Menstruation, you may have heard of it, happens to 50% of the population.
This show is like, he's super into it. Actually, the period episode might show exactly where Emma gets her self-determination. There's a great scene where Emma and Spike are walking through the mall eating ice cream, and creepy adult corner, an adult man says, "Like a lick of that." Yuck! Spike blows up. It's remarkable. She tells him off for talking like that to women in general and to young girls in particular. Emma is embarrassed by her mom's outburst and by what the guy said, and Spike tells her never let anyone make her feel bad just for being a woman. It's a really fun moment. It's very girl boss. And later, Emma takes her mom's advice. When she shows up in clothes that don't fit because she stained her actual clothes, she tells the class she had her period, determined not to feel bad about that fact. There's a lot more to say about Emma. She gets into her first fight with Manny in this season, so we're gonna keep a running counter of that.
You know the difference between you and Paige? Paige is fun. You're so boring, sometimes I want to scream.
Just don't come crying to me when she stabs a knife in your back.
Don't worry, I won't.
But I think I've basically covered her role in the story, aside from her relationship with Sean, I guess. So, Sean Cameron. Sean is one of the most underutilized characters in the show, especially in season 1. He's incredibly interesting. He shows up early in the first season, returning to Degrassi Community School after having been gone for a year. See, Sean used to go to Degrassi. This timeline can be a little difficult to follow, but I think it goes something like this. Sean used to be a part of what I'm referring to as the senior class. I'm using the terms junior class and senior class here to mean older and younger, not the American usage of 11th and 12th grades, which I know some of my Canadian viewers hate because Canada doesn't have juniors and seniors. I hear y'all. I'll stop calling people freshmen. You can't be a freshman in Canada. I get it. I'm using the language of senior and junior here because the two groups are more or less separated into two distinct cliques based on age, and having both junior and senior classes of characters is going to continue for a long time on the show. This way, I don't have to keep referring to the groups based on their grades, which will obviously be changing a lot as the show goes on. And once I start start covering multiple seasons in a video, it will just be easier to refer to the older characters as the senior class and the younger as the junior. Anyway, for now, the senior students are in 8th grade, and that's where Sean is supposed to be. But instead, he's stuck with the grade 7s, having been held back after his move to Wasaga Beach the year before. It's rumored that he's been sent back to Degrassi due to anger issues back in Wasaga, and eventually he reveals to Emma that it's true. Back at his old school, he got into a fight during which he beat a boy so badly that he deafened him in one ear. He now lives with his brother, and he has to see a social worker for, presumably, anger management issues, and is getting his life back on track. It's heavily implied in season 1 that Sean's home life with his parents was dysfunctional, and that being with his brother is good for him.
So Mom called. She's off to booze.
Good for her.
Yeah, well, I'm just warning you because she wanted to talk to you.
Although there will be more direct discussions of this in later seasons. So this is a really interesting place to start a character. He was, for a while, in the same class as the seniors until recently, meaning that he has a history and a relationship with many of them. It's so ripe for interpersonal drama. He has to deal with the fact that his peers are in 8th grade now, while he's stuck with a bunch of grade 7s. Just that would be interesting on its own, but there were also a lot of implied relationship dynamics between Sean and the other grade 8s that never really get fleshed out. For example, Jimmy and Sean have a contentious relationship pretty early on. While most of it is explained by Jimmy blaming Sean for not getting on the basketball team later in the season, eagle-eyed viewers will notice that their relationship seems strained even before that. Like in the first episode that Sean shows up, Jimmy comes over to welcome Sean back to school, but it almost feels a little bit sarcastic, and Sean doesn't seem to appreciate it at all. What exactly happened between Sean and Jimmy before the basketball stuff is unclear, although Ashley's obvious attraction to Sean later in the season and in season 2 might imply that Jimmy is jealous in some way. All of this is, of course, deranged fan speculation from someone who has watched the early seasons of the show way too many times. And maybe there is no mystery and the writers never intended for audiences to wonder about the origins of this feud, but I don't know. It's there from the very beginning when Sean and Jimmy are about to throw hands and Emma steps in, asking Sean to dance and getting him out of hot water with Raditch. I feel like the story, real or imagined on my part, could have been more fleshed out, and it's part of the reason I say that Sean was underutilized. He mostly serves to be an anchorless bad boy for Emma to fawn over, and that's fine for the few seasons that it's the case. However, I still think he could have been more of a character in his own right, even earlier on. Other than Emma, Sean has no interest in the other grade 7s. He comes across as thinking he's too cool for them, which, to be fair, he kind of is. But this also means that Sean is kind of a loner, floating around with no real place to belong. Even when he and Emma start seeing each other for real, a storyline which I find super charming and cute, he never really ingratiates himself with her or her friends. He doesn't come to the environmental documentary viewing party, he refuses to join the talent show skit even when she asks him to. His only real anchor to the school is Emma, as tenuous as that is, which is what makes it so hard when he totally blows it with her, getting into a fight with Jimmy and shoving Emma when she tries to stop him. To Sean's credit, he at least understands that he blew it. They don't try to play it off. Sean is well aware that he backslid in his anger management, and he seems open to taking responsibility for that in the finale. But before we talk about the finale, I want to loop back and talk about that bookender for the whole season that I was hinting at earlier, Ashley Kerwin. Hey, so do you remember this? From the first video that I did about Degrassi, I made my friends watch it for hours, trying to explain why it was such a huge deal that Ashley decided to take ecstasy at her party. So I'm not saying that this whole series is an excuse for me to talk about season 1 Ashley Kerwin, but Ashley Kerwin is the true main character of Degrassi Season 1. Let's break this down into a bulleted list to explain why I'm right. 1. Ashley is the bookender for the season. But Kat, you might say, how can she be the bookender? She wasn't even in episode 1 of The Next Generation. And to that I say, yes, she was. Look, she was right here. Okay, but for real, okay, you're right. No, she really wasn't. She's only the bookender if we remove the pilot/TV movie from the equation. And guess what? That's exactly what I'm gonna do, because it's my video essay and you can't stop me. 2. Ashley's story mirrors Stephanie K's, the first Degrassi main character. So if you skipped my Degrassi Junior High video, Stephanie K was the first bookender character of the show. In it, she goes from being a super well-liked, put-together popular girl who wins the race for student body president to a mess who keeps making bad choices that leave her with no friends. Sound familiar? Ashley Kerwin also runs for and wins student body president, makes a lot of bad choices, and ends up pretty much alone by the end of season 1. They also both have divorced parents, a complicated relationship with a brother-type figure, and an episode with a condom-buying subplot. However, unlike Steph, Ashley actually takes the job of student council very seriously. That's kind of her MO, actually. She's just very serious. For example, she doesn't like her friends messing with occult stuff, not because she doesn't believe in it, but because she does, and she thinks people using it as a joke or for their own gain is dangerous and misguided, making her sort of the ultimate bummer when someone pulls out a deck of tarot cards. So she's not a perfect Stephanie K analogy, who kind of was a girls just want to have fun type character. Bullet point 3. Ashley is the character with the clearest arc. At the beginning of season 1, Ashley is presented as the perfect girl with the perfect life. She's popular, has a rock-solid friend group, a cute and popular boyfriend, and is running for student council. But from the very first episode, in which she finds herself having to run against a competitor that she did not expect, everything starts to unravel for her. Her home life is disrupted by her mom's new live-in boyfriend and his son. Her relationship with her friends is threatened by her perfectionism, which only gets worse as her life spirals more out of her control. The more things kind of fall apart around Ashley, the higher a bar she sets for herself and her friends. She learns that the true reason her parents broke up is because her father is gay, which is a pretty earth-shattering revelation for a girl in 2001, and her relationship with her boyfriend starts to fall apart for a variety of reasons. As her life appears to crumble around her, Ash scrambles to regain control however she can, which only serves to further alienate her from her peers. For example, when she and her friends decide to do a live performance for the talent show, instead of going with the choice that her friends prefer, a more fun, danceable version of the song she wrote, Ash insists that it's her slow ballad or she's out. Her friends then go on to choose their version, leaving Ash alone backstage. This controlling, serious persona will follow her around for the rest of the series. It's kind of her defining character trait for most of the show. Ashley is kind of an overly serious bummer, is not a rare opinion for characters to have about her. But just in this season, it pops up in her relationships with Jimmy, as well as with Terry, who she snaps at and treats pretty badly throughout a lot of season 1. By the time her friends call her predictable and say she doesn't know how to let loose and have fun, it makes sense for us as an audience. We understand why her friends think that about her because we've seen a pattern of behavior that could lead to that conclusion. But we also empathize with Ash and why she would want to shake that perception of her. As a bookender character, she goes from Little Miss Perfect to Pill Popper. So even without seeing the episodes in between, the contrast in her character in the first and last episode is striking, painting a picture all its own. All of this culminates in one of my favorite Degrassi moments ever, which is when Ashley, instead of throwing away the ecstasy that Sean gives her at her party, decides to take it instead, self-destructing spectacularly.
Jimmy, come over. I want to have fun together.
The finale. Jagged Little Pill it's kind of amazing, actually. It does an admirable job of wrapping up a number of really big storylines and character arcs in a big bombastic ending, relatively speaking anyway. Remember, this was before Degrassi's slogan was all about it going there, so while this may seem tame compared to later seasons, it did feel pretty serious at the time. Like the rest of the season, the finale focuses on the junior and senior students separately, although there is some intermingling here as, in a smart writing choice, it all happens in the same house. Ash and Toby, the two quasi-step-siblings, both invite over some friends when their parents go out of town. They're only technically allowed one friend each, but natch, they both invite more than that. Toby invites JT, who then invites Sean, in a misguided attempt to learn how to become cool. Of course, in order to get Sean to come, they have to invite over the girls, Emma, Manny, and Liberty, without Emma knowing that Sean is coming, a classic sitcom-style setup. Ashley, on the other hand, is trying to prove that she's not boring and predictable after her friends make some comments about her, and so she opens the house up to a whole big friend group, proving that she can break a few rules, or whatever. Once the party starts, everything happens at once. JT has somehow gotten a hold of ecstasy from his cousin, he says, and proposes the boys all take it, cementing their status as cool guys. Sean, in an unbelievably wholesome move, offers to split the tablet. When he goes downstairs, however, he replaces the tab with an aspirin and cuts that instead. A callback to classic Degrassi and just generally an S-tier trope. He hands the real one to Ash, telling her to dispose of it down the sink, but Ash, eager to prove how fun she is and maybe even let loose for a change, decides decides to take it instead. This is when things blow up. Ashley turns on the music and dances with Liberty, who she explains that she feels a spiritual kinship with.
But I get you. You're like me, only sorta not. You know?
That's amazing. JT and Toby act goofy as hell, letting the placebo aspirin do its thing until the girls come over. When Emma sees Sean, she turns and runs before he gets a chance to really even say anything. Toby, who's been nursing a crush this whole time, comforts a crying Emma. Meanwhile, once Jimmy finds out that Ash is on E, he tries to have her drink some water. Responsible boyfriend Jimmy Brooks, but Ash isn't having it. When she finds Sean dejected and crying on the stairs, she pulls him into her bedroom to comfort him, and she ends up kissing him, which Jimmy basically walks in on the tail end of. Afterwards, she continues to insult everyone around her, telling Jimmy that she should have dumped him on his birthday like she was planning to, and calling Paige a hag, and then delivering maybe my favorite line read of all season.
Dear, I love your shirt. It's so shiny like stars.
The party is kind of a bummer after that, so of course everyone then bails. Ash, still rolling, doesn't really seem to notice until the next day, when the consequences of her actions are impossible to ignore in the light of day. Jimmy isn't returning any of her calls, and Spinner shows up at her door with a box of her stuff from Jimmy's, saying that it's over. Ash collapses onto the floor and starts crying. Roll credits. End season 1. This finale is a lot. It's pretty melodramatic. Its portrayal of someone on ecstasy isn't actually too off base, at least in my experience and at least on paper. Although I think they were asking a lot of Melissa McIntyre, who had to carry a lot of this episode. And unsurprisingly, she mostly doesn't really manage to pull off 14-year-old girl on E. I actually really like Melissa as an actress. Some of her line reads border on unhinged sometimes.
Terry, I am not a shoo-in.
Liberty! I didn't invite you. How'd you know? Was I sending out psychic vibrations?
But for some reason, the way she says things just works for me. I have a feeling there are probably people who really dislike her, but I don't know, I stan. I mean, anytime the actors were asked to be on substances in this season, from Terry drinking to Jimmy taking Adderall to this, they did an admirable job, but I think without a lot of first or secondhand experience with those kinds of things, the portrayals just ring a little false.
Bring Spinner on, I'm ready for my man.
And I don't actually think that's too serious of a criticism. Like, 14-year-old actress struggles to portray the realities of taking E isn't really the worst criticism you could make, is it? But the rest of the episode is also worth talking about. The storyline with the junior class is a fun balance of lighthearted and serious, with the ongoing Emma and Sean drama only really revving up in the back half of the episode. I remember thinking that drama felt so real to me as a 12-year-old watching it for the first time. If you weren't around or can't remember, it may be hard to imagine the minor moral panic that was happening around ecstasy at the time. Nowadays, it's more commonly known by its chemical composition, MDMA, or Molly, but in the 90s and 2000s, X or E was being called a designer drug, and there was a huge worry about teens getting their hands on it and taking it at parties. Due to the rising raver and club scenes of the 80s and 90s, it became one of the 4 most popular recreational drugs in the US, prompting what I think is a huge overcorrection, and a lot of media from the era were forced to address it. In 2002, it felt so cool to me that the show was choosing to address E rather than something like alcohol or cannabis, which we'd all seen talked about like 100 times at that point. Of course, there is something of a lack of nuance in the messaging. Ashley took an illegal drug and then bad things happened to her. A classic after-school special type morality tale. She sort of only has herself to blame here. This does seem to be par for the course when it comes to Degrassi and drugs, though. Even in the early seasons, the show seems to lose some of its signature nuance in an effort to kind of keep kids just saying no. Really though, for me, the power in this episode comes from the way they pay off Ashley's season-long story arc. The writers on this episode, James Hurst and Aaron Martin, would write some of the more iconic and influential episodes of the early seasons, such as Pride, When Doves Cry, and Time Stands Still. Episodes that would have major impacts on characters and plots throughout the show, and Jagged Little Pill is no different. Like the aforementioned episodes, this one is a big status quo shakeup, and really the first of its kind seen in Degrassi since they killed off Will's parents in Degrassi Junior High. The actions in this episode will ripple out and have major effects on our characters in season 2. There are a few final things that I want to say about this finale, just some stray thoughts I couldn't fit anywhere else. So Spinner shows up at this teen house party with a watermelon. This is amazing, and for some reason it's even noteworthy enough to be mentioned on the very brief synopsis on the Degrassipedia, so I had to give it a shout out. Textually, we never actually see JT discover that he didn't take E. Toby does find out from Jimmy, who confronts Toby about bringing the tablet into the house, but JT is nowhere to be found, and later can be seen diving into a group of the senior class who all seemed thrilled to throw him around. I checked the deleted scenes to see if they ever filmed him finding out, but instead what I found was a cutscene of him kissing Liberty, where he thinks he's high, attributing it to the drug. This was part of a subplot that was completely cut from the episode, in which JT is trying to get his first kiss, which is really cute, but ultimately it was probably worth cutting, since there's already a lot going on in this one. Plus, we don't want that JT/Liberty story moving too quickly, do we? And that's the finale. It aired in March of 2002 in Canada, and in October in the US. Filming for season 2 started up only a few months after its Canadian air date, and I think partly due to the success of the finale, the writers felt emboldened to try new, heavier, and more interesting stories. While I'm talking about endings, let's talk themes. Degrassi TNG, not surprisingly, got an all-new theme song for the new show. While I have a fondness for the Degrassi junior high and high school themes, it's hard to imagine TNG without its iconic whatever it takes. Like the original theme, it has something of a cheesy message: things might be hard, but keep persevering and you'll get through it. This time, the song is sung by a children's choir with a woman's voice riffing spectacularly on top. The opening also leans into the whole technology angle the show was going for, and ends with the classic butt shot, which is a callback to Degrassi High. The rest of the soundtrack is pretty great too. Admittedly, I'm pretty blinded by nostalgia when it comes to these guitar moments in the show.
Are you serious about performing at Lunchtime Cabaret? Then you need to sign up with me by noon today. I'll decide if your act is
Iconic little interstitials and transition pieces that remind me something of like the Gilmore Girls' La La songs. Some of them are more general mood setters, and others serve almost as themes for characters, like this one that seems to be kind of like Sean's theme. This season also introduces the first original song in Degrassi since Everybody Wants Something, Ashley Kerwin's All That You Ask of Me. I'm guessing on the name, by the way. It's not like these songs ever got official releases. Regardless, Degrassi wastes no time in getting its characters to strive toward musical stardom. This will probably be a recurring segment of this series. Billboard's Top Degrassi Songs, in which I rate the original pieces that appeared in the seasons that I'm talking about, and y'all can roast me for my terrible taste in music. This season only has All That You Ask of Me and the quote-unquote danceable remix that Snake whips up on the synthesizer that he inexplicably has in his classroom at school. So if I have to rank them, I basically have to ask, do I prefer a slow piano ballad about a sad girl wrestling with the contradiction of being yourself while striving to meet a standard that you didn't set, or a fun pop song that reads more as a 2000s era Destiny's Child breakup song about finding independence? I think Ash's version is better musically. The piano is pretty, her voice is nice. I think thematically the tone and the pace fit. But as a viewer, Terry and Paige's version is just more fun. So that one wins. And that concludes the Billboard Corner for this video. Finally, I want to mention the ending theme, which Degrassi finally got right. After 5 seasons of 80s cheese bouncing along while the credits roll on a teenage girl walking away from her abuser, or whatever, Degrassi finally learned. There's a freeze frame, and then a credits pop. That's just iconic by now, so I guess they weren't going to fix what wasn't broke. But what they learned was that they don't need to play the ending theme immediately during the freeze frame. So, in many of the episodes, instead, they play an acoustic sting that matches the tone of the scene. It's often this guitar riff.
Good work yesterday. Your parents should be proud of you. I certainly was.
Which is kind of upbeat and inspiring. I think it's also the chords of the theme song, which is a nice touch. Sometimes, though, the music is more somber, as in the finale. And sometimes, like in the episode Cabaret, the sting matches the episode in some way. In this case, by adding little synthesizer sounds in.
Then we are PMS.
The music that plays over the ending credits is also nice and also changes based on the mood of the final scene. Happy endings use an instrumental karaoke version of the main theme, while the more somber endings play the guitar version. It's really subtle, and I actually never noticed it too much until I started paying attention for this series, but it is actually a really welcome change after the wildness of Degrassi Classic. And, believe it or not, this actually brings us to Intermission. Welcome to the second instance of Degrassi Fashion Corner. This time I'm going to be trying to talk about some of the characters' fashion choices with an eye towards analysis versus just a flat up and down review. Unlike Degrassi Classic, I can't find much evidence that the kids dressed themselves in The Next Generation. The production for The Next Generation was a lot bigger, mostly being done on backlots and sets, and so I think costuming probably played a bigger role starting from this season. This means that A, characters' clothing choices are more deliberate, and B, I won't actually be insulting a real teenager's fashion choices, something that would make me both rude and a hypocrite given some of the stuff that I wore in middle and high school. All that to say, that gives me a lot of permission to go hard here, so let's roast some teens. Paige's sunglasses. Paige isn't seen in season 1 without a pair of sunglasses that looked like the ones you could buy basically anywhere in the 2000s, but given the bedazzlement, I'd guess that they came from Limited 2 or Claire's. We were just transitioning out of those tiny useless sunglasses, although not totally, we will see some of those later, and moving into our bigger is better sunglasses phase, which took up a lot of the 2000s, although we were far from reaching the enormous size that our sunglasses would eventually grow to. I always wanted a pair of ombre or gradient sunglasses like this, but alas, I am a nerdo who needs prescription glasses to see, so I missed the boat on this one. Paige's purse. Though this is only seen in one episode, I think, it gets the spotlight for a good, 45 seconds or so, and so it must be mentioned. Clear plastic was big here, and Paige is leaning into the idea that cool girls must always be ready with lip gloss or chewing gum in their perfectly matching little accessory. Crimped hair. You see this a lot in this season, mostly worn by Emma and occasionally Paige. This was having a minor comeback at the time. I think Christina Aguilera wore her hair crimped from time to time, and later, of course, we would see the look rocked by Lizzie McGuire. Not sure Emma pulled it off here, but on the plus side, it's a pretty realistic portrayal of how a 13-year-old girl might choose to crimp her hair in the early morning hours before school. JT and Spinner's hair. Spiked boy band hair. Do I need to say anything else? This was the look for boys at the time. The only thing would be even trendier is if they frosted their tips. Oh shoot, spoilers for season 2, I guess. Well, look, it's worth noting, I'm sure some guys still rock this cut, and I don't have a problem with it, honestly, but it does remind me of my middle school years in a major way, so it's very nostalgic. Midriffs. We mostly only see this when Paige decides that she and the girls need to dress up or look hot, but bare midriffs were not uncommon at this time. I remember my school having to add a rule for our dress code in 2003 to address the issue, because I guess we didn't have a rule for it before that, but it's something that caused no end of headaches for teachers who had to punish any gap between a top and pants in a time when low-rise jeans were just about all you could buy. We'll see bigger and bigger gaps as the series goes on, and the trend becomes more and more of a parody of itself. Also in this scene of Paige attempting to look hot is frosted eyeshadow. I can feel the sticky cream eyeshadow in this scene. I can feel how it felt to apply with the tiny little brush that came with the drugstore palette. I can feel it sticking to itself every time I need to blink. So why do I still think of frosted blue eyeshadow as the height of cool? I need an intervention. Pigtails. Worn by both Manny and Emma, this is only notable for how their characters will change over time. Manny's look especially is worth noting since her makeover is one of the more iconic moments in the show. But in general, the way that Emma and Manny choose to dress is something to watch, as their wardrobes do seem to echo their overall character arcs. Honorable mentions go to Emma's lesbian flag sweater. How many of y'all would wear this today? Be honest. And Liberty's cowboy boots. I understand that these just exist to show that Liberty is a weirdo whose idea of luxury spending is a shiny new pair of cowboy boots, but I'm from Texas. I was the quintessential weird kid. I literally had a pair of red leather cowboy boots growing up. I love these. Did she go to a Western supply store? Are there even cowboys in Toronto? I have so many questions. Keep it real, Liberty. As always, if you want to tell me how wrong I am for my fashion opinions, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Please try not to take any criticisms that I make too personally. I'm just goofing off, and if you love something that I hated or hate something that I loved, it's all in good fun, and fashion is different for everybody. Part 2. The characters. So normally this is where I would do some sort of lightning round and talk about the characters that haven't gotten the spotlight yet. But because so many of these characters are going to continue to be a huge part of the coming seasons, I thought that instead, just this one time, I would actually give you an introduction to all of the characters, even those who don't play a major role in storylines this season. I just don't want to have another situation like my Degrassi High video where I was introducing characters who had been in the show for a while, only when their storylines became interesting. So now you see why I'm only covering season 1 in this video. I think it'll probably be worth it later since I won't have to spend too much time reintroducing the characters. Probably. It also means that I get to talk about some of my favorite characters. Many of the best characters in this show, in my opinion, are relegated to the sidelines in the first season, which is more than fine. Most of them, minus a few outliers like Hazel, do get at least one episode exploring their character a little bit, and while it's not much, giving a basic rundown of who they are and what their deal is in this season means that I get to show them off. As if I'm their dad, and you're the unsuspecting stranger in the doctor's office who is forced to look at pictures that I keep in my wallet. Behold, my children. Terry. Terry is part of the popular group in the senior class. She doesn't get up to much this season, although she's a pretty consistent presence in the senior class stories. Terry is a sweetheart. Her mom died when she was younger, and she carries that a lot. Her main character trait this season is her insecurity. She struggles with feeling insecure about her body and her weight, as well as sticking up for herself when going against her more assertive friends. Terry's weight is the subject of her first episode, Eye of the Beholder. As the episode title suggests, Terry has a pretty low opinion of her appearance, although basically everyone else around her can see that she's gorgeous. Spinner is obviously interested in her, and even jealous Paige has to admit that she looks good when they dress up for the dance. We never actually see Terry have to deal with fatphobic bullying. And maybe that's a good thing. It's kind of nice for Terry to be seen as an attractive, likable, popular girl, but she still has that insecurity, and part of me feels like it's something of a disservice to behave as though Terry's shame about her own body is entirely internally motivated. We all know how many external factors there are pressuring young girls to be thin, from peers to media sources, and I do feel like it's something of a missed opportunity. But that's my only real gripe about Terry's storylines. I really like her 2 episodes. Her first, Eye of the Beholder, which I already mentioned, is a classic. I've referenced it multiple times on my channel before, but most importantly, when I was talking about an episode of Degrassi Junior High in which Steph and her friends get drunk before a school dance, which I then called a Degrassi staple. So in this episode, Terry has a crush on Spinner, and it seems as though Spinner might like her back, but Terry's insecurity keeps her from really believing it. Ashley suggests that they give Terry a makeover, and Paige, in a fit of jealousy over Spinner Mason of all people, joins in and feeds Terry glasses of sherry before the dance. It's unclear what Paige's true motivations are in this action. She probably wanted Terry to make a fool of herself, but she doesn't seem to bask in Terry's humiliation, really. She really just kind of takes advantage of the situation to move in on Spinner, who, at the end of the episode, then tells Terry he'll be getting his notes from Paige from now on. This one has kind of a preachy tone. Like I said earlier, Degrassi struggles with nuance when it comes to teens trying out substances. It comes across a bit like it's telling girls not to use alcohol to mask feelings of insecurity. Okay, fair, I guess. But by making Terry truly the object of Spinner's affection, it almost reads like Terry shouldn't have felt insecure in the first place. Like, she was so blinded by trying to look like something else that she couldn't see the good that was right in front of her. And I actually think that's a pretty weird way to frame a teen girl being insecure about her weight, but then again, maybe I'm reading into it too much. Like I said, I appreciate them acknowledging that her actress was stunning and that a girl can be both bigger and the object of a lot of male attention. Just like as a bonus note, it's not just Spinner who thinks that Terry is hot. Later on, Ashley and Paige are having a competition to get Toby's mom to sign one of them as, like, a young model. And in the end, Toby's mom gives Terry her business card. Foreshadowing. Terry's second episode is the Cabaret episode, in which she and Ash plan to enter Degrassi's talent show, which I talked about a bit in the Ash section. Terry ends up pulling Paige into the group, who she seems to get along with better than Ash ever since Ashley snapped at her in an earlier episode. In that one, Terry questioned Ashley's decision to have sex with Jimmy after she'd said earlier that she wasn't interested. In a classic Ashley Kerwin move, Ash snapped back,
I can't believe I'm listening to relationship advice from someone who's never even had a date.
Yikes. She later apologized, but their relationship remained strained for the rest of the season. Anyway, in Cabaret, Terry, who has taken up an interest in divination for a class project, manipulates the tarot cards to convince Ash to let Paige join their group. Ashley takes the occult very seriously and will do basically anything the quote-unquote mystic oracle, as they call it, tells her to do. However, after one of Terry's offhanded predictions comes true,
It means your day will end unexpectedly, with a twist.
Twist?
Terry, you predicted a twist and she just twisted her ankle. She did. Can't believe she did.
she decides not to mess with mystical forces anymore. So when there is another disagreement in the group about which version of the song they should perform, she tells Paige that she isn't going to stack the deck like she did last time. However, because she is terrified to take a side between Ashley and Paige, she's eventually forced to pick a card again to settle the dispute. When pressed, she then lies to Ashley about the meaning, saying that the card sides with her and Paige, when it doesn't. The night of the show, Ashley confronts the girls, telling them that she knows that Terry lied. She says she looked it up online, which I love, and she refuses to go on stage against the will of the Oracle. Terry finally stands up for what she wants and says that she's going to perform the remix version with Paige whether Ash likes it or not. And instead of anything bad happening, the girls are a hit. Ash is then forced to admit that she was wrong and they did great. Not related to Terry, but important to me, is that at the end of this episode, Paige comes up with the name PMS for their band, which is short for Paige, Michaelchuck, and the Sex Kittens, and I love everything about that. I genuinely think a girl group called PMS is just, it's so 2000s era Avril Lavigne punk. It's amazing. The main theme of this episode is that Terry struggles with telling people what she really wants. She tells Paige she wants her in the group, but she doesn't really stand by that when talking to Ash. She uses the Oracle to shield herself from having to say what she really wants to, all the way up until the end when she does seem to grow a little. That also seems to balance out the power dynamics of the group more, and the girls are able to compromise at the end. By the finale, though, Terry seems to have basically almost had it with the way that Ash treats everyone around her, with that night sort of being a last straw. Spinner. Gavin Spinner Mason is one of the only characters in the show with a Degrassi Classic style nickname. Spinner fits in right next to Wheels and Snake. It's implied that he was given the nickname due to his ADHD. Spinner's ADHD is not mentioned a lot throughout the course of the show. The writers found other things they wanted to do with him and don't often frame his storylines around that part of his character. However, as someone with ADHD myself, I will continue to read him through that lens, maybe providing a bit of perspective for some of his behaviors further down the line, whether the writers intended it or not. The only episode that really addresses it is Basketball Diaries, where we get to see Spinner when he's not on Ritalin. The main thing about Spinner, especially in the early seasons, but sort of throughout the lifespan of the show, is that Spinner is more often defined by his relationships to other characters. In season 1, that's primarily through his relationship to Paige and Jimmy. His relationship to Paige will go on to define huge chunks of the show, but like I said, it's not all about his romantic entanglements. For example, in later seasons, we will see that his association with the wrong friend group is going to define the choices that he makes, and finding a place where people accept him for who he is kind of an ongoing thing with him. In season 1, his relationship dynamic is mostly all about Jimmy, whom he has a really wholesome loyalty to. For example, in the aforementioned Ritalin episode, Jimmy is struggling to juggle both his schoolwork and trying out for basketball. Jimmy is actually a really good basketball player, but he's something of a perfectionist and a tiny bit arrogant, so he struggles with the idea that he might not be the best on the team. That honor instead goes to Sean, at least in Jimmy's estimation. After an all-nighter working on a paper, he asks Spinner for the last of his ADHD medication, which will act as a stimulant for Jimmy before a practice exhibition game. Spinner, being a loyal friend, eventually gives in. Both Jimmy and Spinner's behavior during the game is erratic. Jimmy because he is on a stimulant, and Spinner because he's not. I will say that Spinner's behavior here is not a particularly nuanced view on ADHD, which is often depicted in media as being very disruptive and extroverted. And while this is the case for some folks, particularly AMAB folks, what is shown here seems to be a pretty extreme case. But the important thing to note is that Spinner wasn't trying to be disruptive, at least not until he decided to moon the audience, which is pretty random. He was mostly just trying to cheer his friend on during the game. Even when he's busted by Raditch and asked point blank why he missed a pill, he refuses to give up his friend. He takes the hit, even knowing that it means he'll have to take his pills in front of the nurse from now on. Although I guess if the principal knew he was giving out Ritalin, he'd probably have to do that anyway. This is a really good character episode for Spinner, demonstrating how far he's willing to go for a friend, even when that friend was putting his own well-being before Spinner's. And I guess that brings us to Jimmy Brooks. Jimmy was played by Aubrey Graham, who, famously, about a decade after this season aired, would become known to the wider world as Drake. I don't even know what else there is to say about it. It's one of the more surreal things about this show to me. To watch a relatively unknown actor that you root for and love go on to be one of the most famous people in the world is a very strange experience. Even more so when he's famous not for his acting, but for his dancing ability. Oh, and I guess he writes music. Drake's rise to fame will be something we discuss towards the end of his run on the show, as Aubrey started really pushing his mixtapes in about 2006 and 2007, and wasn't picked up by Young Money until 2009. There is a lot of dirt here, but none of it's actually relevant right now. Just trust me when I say that we will eventually talk about the music video. For now, though, I will say that Jimmy is a pretty low-key character at this point. His two main conflicts are with Ashley, his girlfriend, and Sean, both of which I've already discussed. But to reiterate, from Jimmy's perspective, he has sort of the perfect life, or close to it. He really loves being with Ash, and they're one of the more iconic couples in the school, since they're both like hot and popular and have been dating for 8 months, or in middle school terms, forever. And to be fair, he's actually pretty cool. Like, there's this one episode where Ashley's feeling kind of insecure about her relationship with him because he has to kiss Paige during a Romeo and Juliet scene for English. And so Ash, previously saying that she wasn't interested in having sex with Jimmy yet, decides that it's time for them to go all the way. However, in the end, when she decides to back out, Jimmy is pretty chill about it, saying that he wasn't really ready to, and they end up having kind of a fun time playing with condoms. But in the episode where Ashley almost breaks up with him, it is revealed that Jimmy's life isn't as perfect as we thought. His relationship isn't the fairy tale that he imagined, and his home life isn't that great either. So basically, Ashley feels smothered because Jimmy keeps coming over to her house all the time. He has dinner there multiple times a week, and she's basically done with it. When Jimmy finds out about the way that she's been feeling because Toby, in a misguided but sweet attempt to kind of try and fix the relationship, accidentally lets it slip, he kind of lashes out defensively. That plus Ashley going to his house for his birthday and seeing that his giant house is empty because his parents seem to have forgotten his birthday, or at the very least aren't that interested in spending it with him, makes Ashley feel and is one of the contributing factors to deciding against breaking up with him. While watching this episode with my wife recently, she pointed out something I'd never considered. At one point, after clarifying that Jimmy is eating dinner at their house almost every night, Ash's mom tuts that she doesn't know about Jimmy's parents always leaving him alone like that.
But I just feel bad for the kid. He's always alone. I wonder about his parents sometimes.
My wife wondered if maybe the writers were trying to mislead viewers into what was actually happening in Jimmy's home life. Maybe they were trying to force white viewers specifically to examine their biases then when, in the end, it's revealed that Jimmy's parents are actually wealthy workaholic types. If it was something they were going to do, I think they could have leaned into the viewers' prejudices a little stronger, or maybe hit that reveal harder in some way. It's just been so long since I first watched the show that Jimmy Brooks having upper-class overachieving parents is just kind of part of the storyline to me. I can't remember ever thinking otherwise. It could be that they were trying to subvert expectations, but it's hard to gauge if they actually succeed in that. Let me know if you think this is what they were going for, or if I'm just like really super off base. I very well could be. The fact that Jimmy's parents are rich and never around draws a direct parallel between him and Lucy Fernandez from Degrassi Classic. Both are high achievers with very little adult supervision. They both struggle with their parents' expectations of them, and they're both one of the only black characters in the cast, and later, they will both become disabled due to a friend and classmates' poor decision making. Spoilers. I like to think that this was intentional as well. I do want to say that Jimmy's decision to give Ash the heart that he made her is actually more thoughtful than it looks in the final cut of the episode. In a deleted scene, he tells her that it's because the 9th anniversary is the pottery anniversary, which actually works for me for some reason. I guess it's because he did research about it, so he was like, what should I get Ash for our 9-month anniversary? And he found out that it's the pottery anniversary, so he made her something with pottery. That's really thoughtful and sweet, actually. Paige. I don't know what to say that isn't going to totally give away my feelings for this character in the long run, but I'm gonna try. Paige is sort of the queen bee, mean girl archetype. In the audition tapes for season 1, the Paige character mentioned that she may be less popular than Ashley, but being second in command has its benefits. A number of comments on that video when it popped up on YouTube seem to think that this is a departure for the character, but I actually strongly disagree. Paige always struck me as something of a hanger-on from Ash at the beginning of the season, who then ends up usurping Ash's position as head of the group by the time that season 2 starts. There are a couple of things that really indicate this. For example, in the first episode she appears in, everybody seems kind of surprised by Paige's appearance, and she claims that she had a makeover for 8th grade, a la Steph from Degrassi Junior High. This was never elaborated on, but I'm a huge fan of the theory that she used to look and act totally different. What she says is,
Paige? New year, new look, new Paige.
almost as if she's adopting a new persona. So at the beginning of the year, she comes to school with a mission, to start a spirit squad. That, plus her clothes and behavior, all seem to be designed to push her toward the goal of becoming popular. I don't know, I guess I just kind of like the idea that Paige Mona Vanderwald herself into popularity right before the show starts. And that comparison is kind of apt, actually, because while Paige doesn't have much in the way of a storyline this season, she does seem to have a role, and that's mostly to be an antagonist. When Paige does show up in stories in season 1, she's almost always working against the goals of the main character. For example, getting Terry drunk before the dance, or, in a different episode, getting to play Juliet opposite Jimmy's Romeo, making Ashley insecure of her relationship. If Ashley is the season 1 protagonist, then Paige is our bad guy, constantly getting in Ashley's way and making her life harder. As the season goes on, she gains more power within the group, mostly from winning Spinner and Terry over to her side. But she's not all bad. Actually, I think they gave Paige a lot of nuance considering her role in the season. Specifically, I'm referring to her part in Secrets and Lies, in which Ashley discovers her dad is gay. In this episode, Ash's dad, who mysteriously left her mom years ago with no explanation, comes back to Toronto to be a part of Ashley's life. When he gives a presentation to the class about his job as a war correspondent, all of the girls develop a huge crush on him and demand to know why her mom would ever let a guy like that go. The next day, Paige comes to school with a theory. What if, she asks at lunch, your dad is gay? At first glance, this could seem like another one of Paige's petty little barbs, like it's meant to insult Ashley in some way. But after Ash throws her drink in Paige's face, she turns to Terry and reveals,
My oldest brother's gay. Terry was trying to help.
The reveal that Paige was genuinely trying to offer Ash an explanation for her parents' breakup is a compelling little moment. She's also totally right, proving her gaydar is more than a little accurate. It's also fun in hindsight, after Paige's older brother is given a more prominent role in later seasons, as well as due to other character developments that Paige has. Look, I'm just saying that Paige not being a homophobe is going to be part of her character. I mentioned her earlier, but I want to give a quick shout out to Hazel Auden. She shows up in the latter half of season 1, and while she doesn't get any episodes, she is worth mentioning. She actually gives a lot of weight to my idea that Paige gains power throughout season 1 as she picks up Hazel to be kind of her own second in command. Hazel is an asset for Paige as she is popular and, according to Spinner in a later episode of the show, one of the hottest girls at Degrassi. We'll talk about her more next season, but I just didn't want to forget her because she does show up in season 1 even if she doesn't get a lot to do. Moving into the junior class, Manuela Manny Santos is a fun, bubbly grade 7. It is implied in this season that her parents are strict. At one point, she says she can't go out on a school night, but her friends can come over. I've already talked about how it seems like they were playing with the idea of Manny being the child of Indian immigrants and having an arranged marriage, something that they would revisit on the show later, but it seems to have been scrapped at this point. Instead, Manny serves mostly as Emma's sidekick, which I say with all the love in the world. However, possibly due to the actress's acting chops, she does get a storyline in season 1 to kind of test the waters with her. This is an Emma and Manny get into a fight storyline, the first of many. In fact, like I said, we're keeping track. In this episode, Manny wants to join the Spirit Squad, and Emma doesn't want her to because cheerleading is sexist. Manny joins the Spirit Squad, and then Paige kind of double crosses her after Emma writes a nasty article and essentially calls all the cheerleaders like dumb bimbos for supporting a sexist institution. I mean, Emma is clearly in the wrong for not supporting her friend, and while that is acknowledged in the text of the episode, it also kind of implies that Manny is sort of in the wrong for, I don't know, trusting that Paige and Hazel might actually want to be her friends. or something. Like, that doesn't feel good. I don't like that. The main thing to note here is that Manny has a buried desire to be cool and popular, and that desire sometimes gets in the way of more important things. Keep that in mind moving forward into other seasons. So as I was editing this, I realized that I hadn't recorded a section for Liberty, and I don't know how that's possible because she's one of my favorite characters. Liberty Van Zant is an incredible sort of Hermione Granger type character. Type A, overachiever, total bookworm. I don't think I know anybody who doesn't absolutely love Liberty. She's initially portrayed as, I think, a little overbearing and strange. The first interaction we get is between her and Ash, when she prematurely introduces herself as working with Ashley on the student council before the elections have even been held. However, the season continues to humanize her as we see her in a number of situations. She works with Emma as editor of The Grapevine, and at one point she invites Emma to come hang out with her after school. And in the episode Basketball Diaries, she rightfully demands some credit for all of the speech writing that she's doing that Ashley is getting credit for. That subplot had always been a little lacking to me. In it, Ashley challenges Liberty to make the announcements herself to see if she can do a better job. In the end, Liberty bombs in front of the entire school, and Ashley feels bad. This episode was always weird to me as aired because I never understood why Ashley felt guilty. I mean, sure, it's kind of her fault that Liberty went up there and embarrassed herself, but it's not as if Ashley actively sabotaged her, which is kind of how her friends are acting. However, I did discover when I got the DVDs that there is a deleted scene that I had not seen before, in which Ashley actively attempts to psych Liberty out by telling her,
"Break a leg this afternoon, Liberty. It's only the entire school watching. Live."
Suddenly, Ashley's guilt made a lot more sense. I'm not entirely sure why they cut this scene, if it was for time or maybe pacing, although my suspicion is that this scene makes Ashley so much meaner than they intended for her to be. There's actually a lot of deleted scenes from this season where Ashley comes across as a lot meaner. Anyway, this episode does a lot to humanize Liberty and give her sort of a space within the junior class. However, the primary Liberty episode from season 1 is the episode Rumors and Reputations. I'm just going to warn you that we're moving into creepy adult corner if that is something that makes you uncomfortable, even though it ends up not to be true. There are discussions of implied grooming, and so if that makes you uncomfortable, you can skip to this timestamp here to go to the next part of the video. So in Rumors and Reputations, Emma, and of course it's Emma, witnesses the math teacher and coach, Mr. Armstrong, getting close to Liberty while they are alone in a classroom together. This makes Emma uncomfortable, and she starts to watch Liberty more closely. When she asks Liberty what they were doing, Liberty deflects and tells Emma to mind her own business in a way that is very clearly defensive. Emma witnesses more behavior between Armstrong and Liberty that she perceives as pretty sketchy, and so she asks Manny if Armstrong has ever touched her inappropriately. Manny is shocked and says that maybe Emma is getting the wrong idea, and Emma sort of makes her case to Manny about why she thinks that. While they are discussing this in the hallway, it's overheard by Terry, who then goes on to tell Paige, who then tells, the entire school. So by the next day, Emma hears from other sources that actually, yes, this rumor about something going on between Armstrong and Liberty is true. And the rumor sort of morphs. It's very interesting because some people interpret it as Armstrong is making a move on Liberty, and some people are saying that they have slept together or they arrived in a car together to school. It does what rumors do. It grows and it morphs and it completely changes. And then by the time that Emma hears it the next day, she takes this as confirmation of what she had already been suspecting. Not realizing, of course, that she's the one who sort of gave the rumor life in the first place. By the time it gets around to Liberty, she's completely crushed and embarrassed that this rumor has been started. That is nothing even close to the truth. It turns out that she and Armstrong have been spending time together, but it's because he's been trying to help her with her struggles in math, and he thinks that she might have dyscalculia, which is a little bit like dyslexia, but for numbers. She confides in Emma that the reason she was so defensive before was because she didn't want anyone to think that she was dumb or bad at math for whatever reason, that she has this idea that she has to be the most perfect version of herself, and the idea of portraying anything else just stressed her out, and so she pushed Emma away. Emma basically spends the episode trying to trace back the rumor, and I just want to say, for the record, I've always kind of hated the way this episode ends. I'm really glad that Emma tells Raditch that she is the one who started the rumor, because it's true that if Emma had never said anything to Manny, the rumor wouldn't have happened. However, I always think that this part where Terry tells Emma that actually it's your fault, I heard the rumor from you, and refusing to take any responsibility is just really annoying to me. Like, Terry was eavesdropping on a conversation that she was not involved in, and then spread it to someone else as if it were even remotely true or something that she should be spreading. Terry refuses to take any responsibility for this moment and just acts as if it's all Emma's fault, as if Emma was trying to spread a rumor, when instead it seems to me that she was discussing with a peer and friend her fears that maybe something was happening to another girl in their class, and asking Manny, has this happened to you? And trying to figure that out. Especially considering what Emma went through earlier in the season with the creep from the internet, I think it's really reasonable for Emma to sort of jump to this conclusion and try and find out if any of her friends are being victimized. Because Liberty shut her down, she decided to go to Manny. So even though Emma did accidentally create the rumor, it totally wasn't malicious, and I think Terry shoving all of the responsibility onto Emma is super unfair. It also, I think, sets kind of a dangerous precedent. Watching this now in 2021, in the age of cancel culture gone rampant, regardless of what you think about that discussion, cancel culture is the discourse of the day. I think it's really easy to view this episode through that lens of saying, well, you know, like, careful what you say, because it's Mr. Armstrong almost got canceled for something he didn't even do. And really my main problem with that is that I think young kids should be able to talk to each other if they feel concern about the other children's safety, especially when it comes to an adult. I think Emma should be able to talk to Manny and Liberty and other adults about her concerns without it being some big threat of, well, you might accidentally start a rumor that goes out of control and ruins a guy's life. And it's like, no, I don't think teenage girls should be afraid to talk to each other about these possibilities and their fears. I think it's more important that they are able to do that. And I don't think that this episode was actually trying to say they're not, but I think it could be read that way in sort of our current climate. And so unfortunately, I think this is just one of those episodes that time has not been particularly kind to, even though I end up really loving the episode. And of course, it's a great Liberty episode because it gives us a moment to really get to know her and her vulnerabilities. Kind of wish that the episode had been told from her point of view, but I also get why they did it with Emma. Anyway, I'm really excited to see what Liberty does in the coming seasons because her stuff is great. JT and Toby. JT is, in a lot of ways, kind of the Joey Jeremiah of this season. JT is one of the characters who wears Joey's hat in the first episode. They're both class clowns, bright underachievers with big dreams. JT dreams of comedy, however, not rock stardom. While next season, a certain dark-haired brooding boy will come in and take those parallels even further, the show really does seem to lean into the similarities between JT and Joey for the moment. In the first season, JT mostly serves to get into shenanigans and plays the street-smart, book-dumb everyman. He and his best friend Toby play off each other very well in this way as foils of each other. Where JT fails at more general knowledge, Toby excels, and where Toby is weak in the interpersonal stuff, JT carries him through it. Another place the parallels between JT and Joey become clear, as Toby and Snake are so similar in this season that they may as well just be the same character sometimes, and Joey and Snake's friendship is pure and beautiful and what dreams are made of. I literally wrote that, what? Other than Toby getting an episode about his parents' divorce early on, these two only ever really get B-plots in the first season, though they appear in almost every episode. The majority of their stories are the kind of lighthearted, low-stakes affairs that I find so charming about early Degrassi. In one, Toby and JT plan their evening around looking at porn on the computer. JT's cousin gave him a list of free porn URLs written on a piece of paper. Is this the same cousin that sells him ecstasy? Probably, right? JT and Toby spend most of the night cracking the parental controls and get busted in the early evening, having to spend the rest of the night looking at all kinds of sites with Toby's dad and stepmom, unlearning some harmful ideas about women and sex that they may have picked up from watching the porn. In another, Toby and JT find the final piece in a Monopoly-style game piece collection giveaway from a chip company that packages their snacks suspiciously like Pringles. They rope in Liberty and eventually Spinner to their hijinks until it is revealed that, oops, they didn't have all the pieces, they just had two identical pieces all along. Probably the most interesting story that either of them have is in Secrets and Lies, the gay issue episode. In the A plot, Ash has just discovered her dad is gay. And in the B plot, we get Toby delivering this amazing line to JT, wondering why some guys would be with other guys.
I don't know, JT. Some people are just gay, I guess.
JT is struggling with Liberty's crush on him, so he decides to tell her that he's gay to get her off his back. He goes on to play up a bunch of gay stereotypes from the era, honestly really outdated stereotypes, in an attempt to convince her. This storyline is weird because it's clearly not meant to be mean-spirited. It's a silly boy doing a really ignorant thing. One that ends up ultimately being really hurtful to both Liberty and gay people in general. And while I do think that's the point, I have mixed feelings about watching it play out. I mean, JT is not being intentionally homophobic. In a way, the fact that being perceived as gay is preferable to being Liberty's boyfriend is kind of a twist on the common cliche of the time. The concept of a beard or someone taking on a boyfriend or a girlfriend in order to hide their queerness. Of course, Degrassi would play into that trope in the very next season, so maybe they shouldn't get points for subverting it in this one. Either way, JT is shown as a pretty immature character with a lot of growth ahead of him, but in a way, that's really nice. I like the low-stakes, silly storylines that punctuate the heavier ones from time to time, and I'd argue that the show loses something when it decides to go there all of the time. Like earlier I mentioned that Toby gets an episode about his parents divorcing, and while this is a really mundane and common thing for kids to experience, the fact that it's portrayed in a really relatable and grounded way makes it feel kind of good to watch. If I watched this episode as a kid whose parents were going through a divorce, I think that I would find Toby to be something of a role model, telling his parents to stop sniping at each other and stop blaming each other for every little problem that he gets into. It's not as big as gangs or school shootings or getting addicted to drugs or cancer, but it's really important to Toby, and it's really important to every kid whose parents are going through a divorce right now too. The fact that it's mundane is one of the things that makes it so compelling for me. And honestly, those kinds of things are what keep this season in its own category separate from the rest for me. They hadn't leaned into the more dramatic storylines yet, and that gives the earlier season a charm all its own. I did consider putting seasons 1 and 2 together. They do have kind of similar tones, but season 2 is going to introduce a new protagonist who's going to disrupt the equilibrium of the show so much that I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Next season is also going to focus more on the adults as well. While Spike and Snake showed up from time to time in this season, they were hardly in the spotlight. However, they will be getting actual storylines as well as much more Joey Jeremiah. He's going to be in the opening credits next season, so look forward to that. And starting with the next video, I'm going to be grouping the seasons up, so hopefully we'll pick up the pace on this. Definitely not a retrospective. Thanks for your patience as I got this one out. I was just completely overwhelmed by the concept of starting the next generation. I wanted to make sure I did it justice, and when I realized that this first video was only going to cover one season, I got a little scared. Thank you so much to my patrons. Spending so much time on episodes this long about copyrighted material would simply not be possible without my patrons. Specifically, I want to thank my top 8 patrons: Ava O'Day, Cassandra Barker, Cecil, Isabella Petroni, Mary Danielson, and Smith &C. But all of you are wonderful. If you want to contribute to my Patreon, just $2 gets you access to extra bonus episodes, as well as early access to videos before they go up to the general public on YouTube. I want to announce a change in my Patreon tiers starting in October. Starting in October, all patrons from the $2 and up tier will have their name appear in videos. The $10 tier will continue to have their name read out loud. If you can't donate on Patreon, every bit of support goes a long way. Comments, likes, and subscribes are obviously very appreciated and help the channel out a lot. Let me know who your favorite character that I talked about is and what you're excited to see in the upcoming seasons. What's something that you want to make sure that I talk about? I don't always reply, but I read basically every comment that I get, and I guess that's it. So honestly, thank you so much for watching this far, and I hope you have a great day.